There is a healing going on this morning, is there not? Yes.
So good morning. I'm Reverend Liz Moranti, and I also want to welcome you to Monterey Center for Spiritual Living on this auspicious Father's Day, 2013. And to catch up, those of you I recognize as new today, we've been doing a series. We've been doing a series all year about being awake. And each month we've been being awake to different attributes of God or different values or things in life. And this month, because Father's Day is this month, we're being awake to power. And we're being awake to power by trying on life as a spiritual warrior, which some people love, and some of us go spiritual and warrior. How does that go together? And so each week we're kind of talking about how spiritual and warrior do go together. Because if there are those of us who see that we want a world that works for everyone, we want to create a beautiful, peaceful, loving world, then sitting on our cushion in prayer is really good, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I've been talking about that. But at some point, we have to be in the world as well, or many of us do. Some of us, our job is really to be on the cushion, but many of us, our job is to be in the world as well. And in being spiritual warriors, it's not so much that we're fighting against. In fact, it's not we're fighting at all, but we are being a stand for the world we want to see. So today being Father's Day, how do we tie that in? Because our idea of dads actually goes quite well with warriors and the masculine and all that stuff. And when we think of warriors in any sense, we think of them as being brave and courageous. And we like that for our dads too. Some of our dads were, some of our dads weren't. But in that idea of the ideal dad, or the dad we all dreamed of, part of that was being brave and courageous. And so we're going to look and see how that looks from a spiritual warrior perspective. And I'll be endeavoring to tie it into being dads, and at the end I'll tie it all together in an interesting way, I hope. So today, as we talk about, actually, as if any of you notice the title of my talk, the heart of the spiritual warrior, we're going to be talking about that brave and courageous heart and how that looks. But first, let's talk about spiritual warrior, or let's talk about warrior and courage and bravery, maybe bravery from a more traditional perspective. Because when we think of warriors, and when we think sometimes of the masculine, the traditions or the stereotype, we think of kind of armoring up and going out and fighting the world. And I think this goes not just for men. This goes for us women in this age of being strong women too, that there's in the back of our mind that we think, whether we've thought of ourselves as warriors or not, we think about going out in the world and being a strong person in the world means armoring up and going out there ready to fight. When I was going to do this talk, I knew I was going to do this talk, I had picked up the term the spiritual warrior from some different books, and I thought, well, I'll go to Amazon and see if there's books called The Spiritual Warrior. And I guess in certain ways I don't get out much. So I saw a couple of books and I ordered them, and then I realized they were really sort of in the old-time Christian vein that led to wonderful things like the Crusades, which is not the kind of spiritual warrior that we want to be doing. But I think there's a part of us, so I want us to look at this a little bit. There is that part of us that takes on warriorhood in our normal life. And I'm going to give some examples and see if any of you or people you know do some of this. So the first thing, which I do think of as sort of the masculine, is that's that kind of warrior is you just blast in and fix stuff. You know, there's some problem is wrong, you just move right in and fix it. Anybody do that? You don't have to raise your hand. But that idea, when there's a problem, especially someone we love has a problem, we want to go in and fix it. We'll just muscle it in, shoulder it through. It's what dads do. It's what warriors do. Then there's this other thing. Maybe we don't blast in physically, but some of us have been known to go in with our opinion, to go in with our families, or maybe even just watching someone on television, and we start bolstering up and armoring ourselves with an opinion about how we're right and how they are wrong. And whether it's just in our head, or we're yelling at the TV, or we're talking to a person, we have put on an armor and we are fighting. And the more we try to be right, the more we take our stance of trying to be right, usually, at least this is what I've noticed, the other person tries that too. And so we just keep battling on and battling on. And we may get to where we feel we win and we've made that person wrong, but I don't think we've created more peace in the world. I don't think we've created more good in the world. We certainly haven't created more love or harmony in the world. And what I started out in the first week saying is that as a spiritual warrior, we are a stand. Not take a stand, but we are a stand for the deepest truth we know, for compassion, for peace. And then I invited you all to say if there's something else you want to be a stand for. So when we go out armed with that opinion, dedicated to making sure that opinion prevails, we don't often bring more peace or more harmony or more love to the world. In fact, we've just added to the aggression in the world. Then there's another way that often we do. We see this in the movies and we see it in books, but it's because it's such a common human experience, is that we get our heart broken, often by somebody else, or we feel that that's what happened, and so we armor up and protect our heart. We're not going to let that happen again. We're not going to let anybody hurt us again. And some of us live our lives with our heart protected. And we may not let any hurt in, but usually what happens is we don't let much love in either. We go into situations feeling we need to armor up and protect that heart. And that is one of the things we think about warriors, is that they are protected. So it's an interesting conundrum. So you might think about that. Is that one place that you armor yourself up? And then there's another way sometimes we New Thought people do. We can armor ourselves with affirmations. And where that can get tricky is if we start to feel uncomfortable, or something comes up in our life that triggers those feelings of less than or not enough, or an old pain or discomfort. We don't want to feel it, so boom, we go into affirmations. Boom, 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 boom. We pepper ourselves with affirmations as a protection. And we haven't healed anything. We haven't come to a new knowing about ourselves. We've just gone beep, 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 beep. No, I'm perfect, I'm perfect, I'm perfect. Like nothing can get in. And so it's a kind of blinder we put up. Rather than knowing a truth, it's a protective blinder we put up. And that can feel like a battle we're fighting. And all of these, blasting in and fixing, having our opinions bolstered up, protecting our heart, closing off, armoring ourselves with affirmations, they all come from a place of fear. That there's a world out there that's going to hurt us, that's going to damage us. There's a world out there that's unlike us. We have to put up our armor. We have to protect ourselves. And we have to separate ourselves. That's what traditional warriorhood can look like. That all that armor and all that fighting is because we believe that there's something out there that we need to fight against. So let's look at the spiritual warrior and the courage of the spiritual warrior. Because courage, as some of you no doubt know, the word courage, the first part, cœur, is the French word for heart. So courage means coming from the heart, being a brave heart, which is very different. A brave heart in Buddhism, it's called bodhicitta, which is a noble, awakened heart. It is an unarmored heart. It is the heart so brave and courageous that it does not need armor. We'll talk about how this works and what it looks like. Let me give you some examples. I actually love Father's Day, not because of my father, although what a miracle in being in this teaching for me is how my relationship with my father has really magically healed in a lot of ways. And that didn't even feel like anything my doing except sort of generally being in prayer and wanting to be a more loving person. So that's a gift to me. But Father's Day was the first day I set foot in a Center for Spiritual Living, although it was the Seattle Church of Religious Science. It was 23 years ago, so it's a little anniversary for me. So that's always kind of a wonderful memory. And that day that I walked into that church for the first time, there was a guy who was kind of an old friend I hadn't seen for years who was singing. And he's a big, goofy guy, and he sang this song, which I later found out was by Ray Stevens, that is a great entry into the spiritual warrior. Because it starts out, my dad could beat up your dad, but he wouldn't. My dad could beat up your dad, but he wouldn't even try. And so that starts giving us an example that kind of dad, maybe we had that kind of dad, maybe we didn't, but we probably knew that kind of dad. And maybe some of you are that kind of dad. That they had the power within themselves, but knew that fighting wasn't the way to achieve the kind of life we want to live. That isn't where the power was. That wasn't where the heart was. So I loved that song. And then I found an example of a story I'd read a long time ago in a wonderful book. If you want to learn how to be in service, this is a little side promotion. If you are in service or want to be in service or just want to live in a more heart-centered way in the world, this book, I read it over and over, and it's such a great reminder. It's by Ram Dass. Remember Ram Dass? Some of you don't know Ram Dass. He's a wonderful spiritual guy, started out named Richard Alpert. How Can I Help is the name. It's a wonderful book about people who are in service and helping. Lets us know the real story about that. Anyway, so put that back. But there's all kinds of stories from there, anecdotes from people's lives. That's why it's such a great book, because it's very true. And there's one story in here tells about a young man, a man talking about a time when he was a young man and he was living in Tokyo, which I love this story. He was an American living in Tokyo, and I love that because I was a young American living in Tokyo at one time. And he had gone there to be an Aikido student, and he had been there for 3 years studying Aikido and doing it 8 hours a day for 3 years. And Aikido, you know, you've all heard about it. It's often called Aikido. And so I'm just one of those snobs, since I know a little Japanese, and I have to say Aikido. But Ai means to meet. And Ki, you know, is that energy. And Do is the same word as Tao, Taoism, the way. So it's the way of meeting energy. And so even though it's considered a martial art, it isn't the one where you go fight. It's the one where you match energy. You can ask Denise more about this afterwards, since she's been doing Aikido for years. That you match, you meet the energy so that your opponent, or the person who comes at you, you can off-balance them by their own energy coming at you. You learn to match with it. So anyway, this guy has been this Aikido student and working very hard at it. And because it's not like other martial arts, they do not fight in Aikido. And here's this young guy, he's in his 20s, and he's been studying this martial art, and even though he's into it, he's part of him like, you know, I'm ready. I want to prove I know this stuff. And so there's a part of him that's been out in the world waiting for a legitimate, and he calls it that, a legitimate opportunity. You know, somebody to come at him so he can step out of the way and let them throw themselves in the mat. We can all kind of relate to that, being young and being. And so he's riding home on the subway one night, quiet car, just not a few people in the car. And all of a sudden at one station, the door opens, and this drunken guy, probably with a red face, dirty clothes, stumbles into the car. He looks around. I can imagine some of the words he said in Japanese. Probably said, "Bakayoro," because that's what they do when they're angry, and calling everybody stupid. And he lurches in. There's a young woman holding a baby, and he takes a swipe at her. And she goes tumbling into the laps of an elderly couple in the car. And fortunately, the baby's not hurt, but everybody's freaked out, and the young woman and her baby and the older couple leave the car, and he's looking around for somebody else. He tries to kick the woman as she goes out of the way, and he's just, you know, he's out of it. He's angry and out of it. And he grabs the pole. They have, you know, pole in the middle of the things, tries to wrench it out. And our young Aikido friend has just had the thought that a legitimate opportunity has arisen. No, they don't do that, but anyway. And so to get the man's attention, he does him a little insolent kiss. And so the man turns, and he says, "Oh, gaijin," which means foreigner, you know. And he's like, "You jerk, I'll show you a lesson," he says. And just as he's lunging over to our American friend, all of a sudden, a sound pierces the air. "Hey!" Although it was probably, "Anone! Hey!" And in the writing of it, it's the hey when you found something you've been looking for ages, when you're just delighted. Hey! And both our young Aikido friend and the drunken man turn around, and there's a little old man, about 70 years of age, in a kimono, tiny little man, sitting on one of the seats. "Hey," he says, "come over here. Come on over here." In a very easy and gentle way. And the man kind of stumbles and says, "You know, what's your problem, old man?" He says, "Hey, what you been drinking?" He says, "Sake. Want to make a deal of it?" He says, "Oh, I love sake. You know, my wife and I sit out in the palm trees," and he just starts talking to him gently, and the man's kind of like, He said, "Oh, I bet you have a wife too." And he said, "No, I don't have a wife, and I don't have a job, and I don't have a place to live, and I'm so ashamed of myself." And he bursts into tears. And the old man says, "Oh, why don't you sit down and tell me all about it?" And our Aikido friend looks over at him and says, wow, I was ready to do battle. And here is this man who has disarmed with his compassion. And the next stop happened to be his stop. And as he got off, his last vision was of the drunken man with his head in the lap of the old man, was just stroking his head. That's a spiritual warrior. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that kind of kindness and compassion that embraces everything. And the thing that we don't get as Americans often is that compassion and kindness first we extend to ourselves. And that's really where the courage starts. That where we are fearless is not in the face of danger. Where we are fearless, where we are courageous, is in the face of our own flaws, in the face of our own stuff. That we can have it triggered. When we get upset, most of the time it's because something's been triggered in us that we don't like about ourselves. And then that's when we go blasting off to try to fix something, to try to fight something. And blame someone out there. Because of the pain and the discomfort of looking at our own unhealed stuff. The spiritual warrior can look, the bodhicitta heart can look at his or her, at our own unhealed stuff, our flaws, and see them with kindness. Say, oh, it's you again. You silly thing. One of the things I've been talking about the spiritual warrior is that we seek to change our consciousness first. We seek to look in first before we do anything out in the world. And last week we talked about discipline and commitment. And those are important things and necessary things. But if we just focus on the discipline and commitment without the compassion and the kindness to ourselves, then that's a really grim journey. Anybody done that? Said, okay, yeah, I can look at my stuff, and then it's just one more time we beat ourselves up and we beat ourselves up. The Buddhists don't do that. I've shared with some of you before that when the Dalai Lama heard that Americans often loathed themselves, he cried. He couldn't comprehend that we would be so unloving toward ourselves. So that bodhicitta, awakened heart, is that heart that can be with pain, discomfort, and our own stuff, and look lovingly on it. And when we look lovingly on it, it doesn't mean that we have to accept that we'll be this way forever, or accept that we can't start releasing it, healing it, and transcend it. But just plastering the wall with affirmations and not looking at it doesn't always help. It's not how it's defeated, that stuff we have inside. But when we look on it with compassion, then it tends not to cling, because of course it's what we resist that persists. It's what we And if we don't see it if we refuse to see it in ourselves, then you bet we are going to see it out in the world and then go do battle with it. And since it's still in here, it's going to pop up again. So the spiritual warrior's heart knows that and seeks to see it without any cover-up, does not need to protect itself, does not need to blame others first, does not need the armor. And when we extend that kindness and that compassion toward ourselves and our flaws, guess what? Then it is so easy to extend it to others. And once we see it in ourselves and then see that's just a reflection in others, then we start healing that separation and come to know ourselves as one. The great Aikido master and Denise is Ueshiba actually the founder of Aikido? Yeah. He says, winning means winning over the mind of discord in yourself. You should first make God's heart yours. It is a great love, omnipresent in all quarters. Who does he sound like? He sounds like our founder, Ernest Holmes. He sounds like Emma Curtis Hopkins. You should first make God's heart yours. It is a great love, omnipresent in all quarters and in all times of the universe. There is no discord in love. There is no enemy of love. This is the courageous heart. And when we know that oneness, when we allow ourselves to have that heart of God and know it is ever present everywhere in everyone we see, then from this place of oneness, of knowing there's nothing we have to fight against, there's just ideas to embrace and see and look at, then we can be in what we might call enlightened action or bodhicitta action. Jesse Jennings is a columnist in our Science of Mind magazine. His center is in Houston, and he does question and answers on the science of mind, and he's a brilliant, wonderful guy. And he suggested this idea in this month's Science of Mind magazine, and I'd never thought of it this way before, but it's a perfect idea to leave us with. Somebody had asked the question, where is God in X problem? Where is God in that? And Reverend Jesse said, consider that you are God's response to this problem. That whatever we see in the world, that we see as challenges to that world that works for everyone, the things we see that are the issues. And so, where's God? Why isn't God fixing this? What if we are God's response? And if we are God's response, then it very much behooves us to have that bodhicitta heart, that heart of the spiritual warrior that can see all and embrace it unafraid. And that's where we know, when we are that response, that we're going to add to the peace in the world. We're going to add to the harmony in the world, not add to the aggression in the world. And then we can join with Ray Stevens' dad and know that we are capable of much, but we choose what to go out and do, who to be, and we choose to have the open heart. So, let's move into prayer. So to anchor this idea, I turn my attention to that original father, that original mother as well, that I call God, that we call Spirit, that is known by so many names, the Creator, first cause in the universe, that infinite, the whole enchilada, And that one stands ready to be the only armor that is needed. And that armor is the courageous heart. That heart, that love that cannot be destroyed or diminished or exhausted or extinguished by any person, place, thing, event, idea. That love is limitless. It is ever present everywhere. And that love, while it is compassionate and kind, it is strong. Because nothing can weaken it or destroy it. And knowing that we are one with that infinite power and presence. I know that we are one with that love. That same love flows through each of our being. It is the truth of who we are. So in this moment, I claim for myself and for anyone who wishes to join me in this claiming that I claim the heart of the spiritual warrior that can move into the world unafraid to experience pain, unafraid to experience discomfort, unafraid to be wrong or not to be right, unafraid to be right, unafraid to see all parts of myself, unafraid to feel the pain and discomfort of others, and know that my love is bigger than that, because the love of God is bigger than that. And so I move in the world, gradually removing all of my previous armor that kept me from connecting with life and connecting with the spirit of life that is unfolding toward greater peace, greater harmony, greater joy, greater abundance, and greater love. I claim this heart. I claim this heart of the spiritual warrior. And I use this heart everywhere, including myself. I am grateful. I release this word, and so it is.